Well, welcome back to the Sunday's Coming podcast.
Here we are.
My name's Kaleb, in case you forgot.
I'm here every time. Kaleb.
That's right. Easy to remember. And today I'm super stoked because we have Stephen Sheppard.
Yes.
Otherwise known as Shep.
Yes.
And if you follow him on Instagram, it's Shep with what number of dashes?
It's six underscores. Yeah, I
six
couldn't.
Underscores.
Every single one I tried to find and get the right amount, but no, it was like, oh, that one's taken. Oh, that one's taken. So I got six of them, and apparently six of them was.
So if your name is
everywhere.
also Shep, you're gonna have to do 7.
Yes. If you're gonna add, probably 7's probably taken at this point.
That's so funny, man.
Yeah.
It's like when you gotta renew your password.
I've tried to buy Shep, just
really?
regular. Yeah, the guy would not. He didn't respond.
So
that's hilarious.
Hit up Shep. Tell him to sell his account.
He's gonna make you an offer you can't refuse.
Come on, man. That's hilarious,
really
man.
Funny,
oh my
but
gosh.
Shep with 6 underscores.
Yeah, man. Shep with 6 underscores. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, dude.
For people that don't know you or aren't on Instagram, maybe, or like in church subculture Instagram, I'll call it, there's like a certain niche content that we were actually just talking about a minute ago.
100%.
Like, give us a quick snapshot.
Yep.
Who are you? Where are you at? What do you do? What kind of content do you post? And then we'll kind of unpack all that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Stephen Sheppard, otherwise known as Shep, but I'm our broadcast engineer at Elevation Church. I make a lot of content on the internet as well, Instagram, TikTok, and really the purpose of what I do at church is I oversee, to dive into that, because broadcast gets confusing sometimes if you say broadcast engineer.
You don't mix every Sunday.
No, that is not me. I could. Don't mess with me.
Yep, he's got chops.
I have a video background, so the video is like my strong suit. But I oversee our audio, video, and lighting at our broadcast location. So they're henceforth the broadcast engineer. But essentially, my job on a Sunday is to be the fireman who responds to anything that's going wrong, make sure that everything's working, streams are going out, cameras are working, audio, video, all that.
But you're at Elevation, so I thought nothing ever went wrong there.
It doesn't.
Never. So your job is basically cush. It's like a corporate gig. You just sit there for 8 hours and don't do anything.
Corporate chilling gig. Yeah, no, I just mingle and talk with volunteers and make sure everybody's
it's amazing. That's why you can have time to film all your Instagram content.
Dude, there's so much downtime. You know, it's such a funny thing. This year was when I actually started posting a lot more content. I came into the role in September of this past year. And I've always made Instagram videos. I've always just made content, which is just kind of like a part of me where I've always had a fun. It's essentially been my creative outlet. And I just kind of found this very niche. I posted a reel. One of the first ones that popped off was like a day in life as a Elevation broadcast engineer. And it was me scanning my phone to fob doors. So it was literally like, beep,
dude, I remember
beep,
that.
Beep, beep.
Yes.
And I posted it just thinking like, oh, that's kind of funny. I think it's funny.
Yeah.
And it popped off and I was like, whoa. Okay, maybe there's a little bit of something here. So that's when I like started diving in. I was like, okay, what kind of content is helpful? What kind of things can I make? And so if you've followed me within the past year and like, who is this guy? Where'd he come from? You know, what you see is, I've been at Elevation for years, which we can talk a little bit about that. But just recently with my job, I've kind of had this ability to capture and share a little bit of what we do inside Elevation and just make it feel like, oh man, they're human too. Like it's a normal thing. Like, you know, we make mistakes. We have, we do great work. And ultimately the goal is to get the gospel out to people is what I try to always reinforce. And so, but yeah, I'm a broadcast engineer at Elevation. It's a wonderful time. So
you were mentioning a little earlier that you have like a specific target audience for your Instagram.
Yeah.
Say a little bit about that. Like you're doing this content, you're given a behind the scenes window into the workings of production Elevation.
Yeah.
But what's that specific goal that you're aiming at?
Yeah. So I specifically, I would say anyone in high school up through probably my age, our age up to the 30s ish. But I try to lean more towards the younger audience, younger guys who are serving in production, guys and gals who are serving in production on the weekend or maybe on staff at a church. And so if you're like, man, this guy's content is not for me, it's wild, it's crazy. Well, that's kind of the goal is like, I know who my audience is and who I'm trying to talk to. And the reason is like, I was them, you know, for a very long time. Like I grew up in the church, from a young age. I started attending Elevation when I was 12. A buddy of mine had invited me and was like, hey, you're not going to church right now. Come to church with me. Let's go to check out this church down the street. We just started going. And at the time, Elevation was, I think, 3 years old at the time in 2009. Okay. And I started serving on the production team day one. He was serving and doing cameras. And he was like, dude, come with me. Let's go serve together. Awesome. So from then on, that was like kind of like the spark that Elevation and church became, and serving, volunteering kind of became like the foundational rock that, you know, even though I was not the most perfect kid, I was doing crazy stuff in high school, playing football, girlfriend, all kinds of stuff. But church was the thing that I was always able to go back to. Serving and being a part of a community was always the thing that I was able to stay rooted in. And I basically served for a couple years. I'll talk a little bit more about my story and kind of upbringing, but served for a couple years as a volunteer. When I turned 17, 18, I had a leader who really challenged me, and he literally pulled me to the side, and he goes, I had showed up late one day. And so he goes, hey, dude, there's so much more in you. I don't want you to see you showing up late to something like this because of what's inside of you. And like, I was kind of taken aback because I was like, whoa, no one's ever really called me out for something that, I thought was just normal. Like, oh, okay, I can show up kind of whenever I want. But truly there's standards and there's ways that things need to be done. And so, but it was his intentionality to have a conversation with me that really struck me differently. And honestly, really truly altered the course of the way I see church and the way I see even what I do as a volunteer. And so from that moment on, I was like, man, I'm gonna take this serious. This guy challenged me. I'm gonna take it serious. And so that's what I started doing. And so I ended up started, as a volunteer, was directing experiences and kind of like leading without the title, essentially. Like we were a load in, load out campus, so we would show up at 5:30. But I was like, you know what? I'm gonna set the tone for this thing. So I would show up at 5:15, and start unloading the trailer and the truck by myself, just because I'm like, I want to like kind of create this energy. And it was really funny because we had a bunch of other high schoolers who are a couple guys my age, but then also younger than me, who were serving. And so they started showing up early too.
That's awesome.
And they're like, dude, let's go. Like, the energy of the campus and the energy of our production team was just very well known from a very early start. From that moment, with someone challenging me, kind of like called something out of me, which then I took that and was like, hold on, man, someone's caring enough about me to challenge something in me. But then that enabled me to kind of look at what I'm doing and put more energy and effort into it. And so I served for a couple of years. I ended up doing an internship at our broadcast location at the time, which was Blakeney, not Ballantyne. Blakeney launched in 2010. So Jared Olson, he's currently our broadcast engineer or broadcast production director. Interned with him. That was... What year is this? 24? That was 10 years ago. 2015, that was 9 years ago that I interned, which is crazy. And did an internship. And then at the end of that internship, I really wanted to be a lead intern, was kind of like the track. And so I was like, dude, I really would love to be a lead intern. And they said, hey, no, like, you're not gonna be a lead intern. Like, we want you to get some life experience and to grow a little bit. And I was like, super bummed, because I was like, I felt like I was doing all the right things. I felt like I was putting in work and I was serving. And then one of the things that I realized later on in life was that I so often was doing things for God, and I didn't actually do things with God. And so it was kind of this realization where I'm like, oh, I need to have a little bit more of a shift. And even now into my adult life, that kind of same thing, that kind of same principle has always challenged me to consistently have a relationship with God instead of just doing things for Him. Because I think sometimes we get in this rut of like, working for a church and having to do things 100%. Instead of actually like seeking God in the things that we do. And so that out of the internship was kind of like this big picture moment for me where I was like, oh, okay, I don't just need to work hard for God, but God wants to have a relationship with me. So if I'm going to go anywhere, I need to have a foundation and something that's rooted in that. So did an internship, ended up being told no. And one of the other guys who was leading at the time, he brought me onto the tech team for a couple months. So got to form some great relationships. So I got to kind of see a little bit different side of the church and on the tech side versus the production side. And so did that for a couple months, and then ended up in 2016, was asked to go launch our Melbourne campus down in Florida. So young kid, I was 19 years old at the time. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to say yes to this. Like, this is awesome. A crazy thing. So being asked to do that was a huge step and a huge stepping stone to then leading people at a higher level. And so when I moved to Florida, I moved there in 2016. It's where I ended up meeting my wife. At the time, the campus was 140 people, 100 to 140 people. One service on a Sunday. We ended up growing it to, in 2017, we were about 800 people. 2 services, all that kind of stuff. And so I got to be a part down in Florida of really like, you look at Elevation like, man, this is a crazy like big church. But it's like, I've also been a part of the small church where you got to go out on Friday and go into the street and invite people who are drinking and who are partying and doing whatever to church and have conversations with people in the streets. And so it was kind of like this cool level of evangelism where I didn't really realize it. I just thought, I'm like, man, I just coming down here for production and to launch a campus. But then at the same time, I was developed in so many different ways that looking at the time, I'm like, man, this is hard work. Man, why am I working on a Friday? Because if you have Fridays off. And so looking back now, I'm like, man, I so appreciate that season that I was in, but I wish I had the perspective that I have now. And so, no, Florida was fantastic. We was able to be a production director down there. And at the same time, I did youth. So I had never led youth or built a youth ministry.
Wow.
And so I was a youth director and a production director. So I'm like, preaching once a month for some of the youth gatherings that we had. My sermons were terrible. I hope they're not found anywhere ever. But it was crazy kind of being an instrument preaching because a couple kids end up giving their lives to Christ and having conversations and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I never saw myself as somebody who would not only do the production thing, run around setting up the event and then turning around and having to preach the event was crazy. But also just a muscle and an exercise that I got to do, which I feel like truly helped me become who I am today. So got to do that for a little while in Florida, met my wife down there. We dated for a couple of months. We got married in summer of 2017. So in 2017, we were doing some staff. We're moving around and we wanted to launch another campus. Elevation wanted to launch a second campus in Raleigh.
Okay.
And so they were like, hey, Shep, we want you to move with your brand new wife to Raleigh to be a part of the launch team that's going to launch that campus. And I was like, cool, let's do it. That's
awesome.
And so I just took the opportunity. We ended up moving up there. They moved another staff couple down to Florida, made some really cool adjustments, which helped that campus grow even more. And then I got to go and be a part of Raleigh. Morrisville was the city that it was in. Now it's Raleigh and Durham, just, a lot of stuff happened through COVID. But so I got to launch a campus there, work alongside my wife, which was really, really cool. It was a season where like, we were both outside of family. Like her family was in Florida, my family's in Charlotte. And so it's like the first time as a married couple, now we're figuring out life and figuring out ministry together and, doing production and continuously pushing the bar at a non-permanent campus and all that stuff. And so, even up until this point, I had never worked in a permanent building, permanent facility.
Wow.
Even from the age of 12, that campus was non-permanent. And
That's
so
crazy.
I did an internship at Broadcast, which was permanent, but then went right back to using those same skills and talents of loading in, loading out, and it's a grind, dude. I remember, and those of you guys who are at non-permanent churches, be encouraged. I know it is a lot of work, but also there's a lot of fruit that can come from it. It just looks different than, the end goal should never be a building. I think a lot of people think like, oh my gosh, if we can just get a building. It's like, no, at the end of the day, you are where you are. You're called where you're supposed to be called, and use what you've been given and max it out to the full. You know what I mean? And if you're at a non-permanent campus, build that thing. You know what I mean? Train your volunteers. Your volunteers in a permanent building, they don't know how to do a lot of the stuff that you're setting up and tearing down every single Sunday. So in some cases, I look at that, I'm like, hey, you actually have more of an ability to train people and to show them how exactly things are wired, how they work, all that stuff. So no, Melbourne, one funny thing I used to do down in Florida is we used to pull up at Waffle House at 4 a.m. So our loading, our loading was 5.
Okay.
And I was like, dude, how do I get people excited to show up to church to serve at 5 a.m.? It's
Waffle
early.
House, dude.
Who would have thought?
Dude,
who would have thought?
That's amazing.
So we would pull up to Waffle House at 4 a.m. Granted, you got people who've been out all night, whatever. It's a crazy crowd. We had record attendance of 6 volunteers show up to Waffle House at 4 a.m.
I love it.
And
so cool.
Man, it was definitely one of those things I look back, I'm like, I would likely never go to Waffle House now. Yep. But being 19, 20 years old, I'm like, dude, I wanted to do everything that would create memories for our volunteers, would create a sense of buy-in for our volunteers. And at the time, our worship and production team was combined. And so we would invite everybody, hey, whoever wants to pull up to Waffle House at 4 a.m., I'm buying.
That's
you know what I mean?
awesome.
And we're gonna take care of it. But many of us would end up in the bathroom at 5, but still, it was that
Why did church
camaraderie.
start late today? Well, setup got delayed.
We all went to Waffle House.
Yeah, what's going on?
That's funny.
Exactly. So no, I always look back to like, man, there's so many different methods to building volunteer teams and pieces and strategies that you can do to maximize the area you're in, the space you're in, and all that. So I was at non-permanent for a long time. We were in Morrisville for a couple years, and in 2019, at the beginning of 2019, just felt God was like stirring something different in me and Bree. And we like we're praying through transition and praying through, man, what should we do? Like, we feel like we need to leave Elevation and move back to Florida where her family was. The benefit is we can still be a part of the church. We can still volunteer. Yeah. We still have friends and family. Yeah. And I had a really cool job opportunity down there to work for a great company. So we made the decision to end up leaving staff in 2019, move to Florida. Okay. And then we're kind of just in this like 6-month waiting period of the job that I thought I was going to get fell through. And I couldn't get it. And so then I was like, dude, what do I do? I'm going to keep serving. I'm going to keep showing up and helping, build production on there from a volunteer side of things. And the campus at that time, in 2 years that I was gone, had grown from 2 experiences on a Sunday. They had moved locations to like this kind of permanent facility. And they were doing 4 experiences. So 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday. Okay. Campus was thriving. They had gone from, when I was there, 150 people to like over 1,200 people at the time. So it was really cool to kind of come back to and living in like, man, this is crazy. I got to be a part of starting this thing. And the people who have been here, taking it to new levels. But, and so we were in this like waiting period of like, man, God, wait, did we make the wrong decision? Did we move down here prematurely? Was that really you? Yeah. You know what I mean? You start to kind of question a little bit. I got a job at Best Buy. Worked at Best Buy for a little bit. I was a mobile sales consultant. Awesome. Dude, shout out Best Buy. It was like my first taste or a taste back of, after working in ministry for a little bit of like, this is like what real world people feel like. This is what real world conversations. Prior to that, I did a stint at GameStop before I worked.
Did you get some stock while you were there?
You should have bought some stock,
bro. What was that, like 19 or 20 when they did that like weird Robin thing where they inflated the stock? Remember that?
It was 2 years ago.
Yeah. Was it more recent?
I think so.
Yeah. Like, what a time.
It was about GameStop, man.
Dude, there you go. Well, now it's, I don't know, is the stock, is it?
I think it dropped. It was a giant.
I haven't looked in a while, but
it was fun. Amazing. I did enjoy working at GameStop. GameStop was like, I'm a gamer myself. Yeah. Love playing Call of Duty. And so that was a blast. So then going to Best Buy, I was like, okay, cool. Like I love people. The job that I was doing was sales. And so it's having conversations. So, but we're in this waiting period that just feels like it's lasting forever. And so that was March is when we moved down there. In September is when Bree's dad actually comes and is like, hey, I've got a job opportunity in Houston. And I'm like, okay. I mean, I'm not tied to anything here. Now it would really stink to leave Elevation completely. I've grown up in this church for the past couple of years, and man, I guess I'll trust God and see what's out there for me. And so we end up moving to Houston with family in the end of 2019, and we get connected really quickly because I'm like, I gotta find a church out there. And so we ended up going to Hope City out there, and we had a bunch of friends who are from Elevation who were on staff there. So we quickly got connected. It was like one of the main priorities of us moving was getting back plugged into a church and serving, because I think having grown up in church and having to being able to find the community was just really, really important for us and be able to have that consistency. And so quickly got plugged in. My wife actually got hired before me, which is fantastic. And then I was even asking myself the question, like, do I want to work in church? I'd done it for the past couple of years, and I'm like, is this what I want to kind of commit myself to? Or do I want to do integration, or do I want to do something on the outside, something a little bit different? So I was kind of wrestling with that a little bit. But eventually end up, I'm like, okay, cool. These guys, I really would love to help them out and make things happen. And so I came on as their, as kind of overseeing production for the broadcast and the couple campuses. And what's funny is coming to that church, it was also non-permanent broadcast. So we are setting up and tearing down a gym. And so I'm like, holy cow, like all these experiences that I've had growing up doing the same kind of method and vibe of church is what we're doing now, but just even at a bigger scale. And so we would load in all day Saturday. It would be anywhere. We got it down. The shortest amount of time was 3.5 hours of load in, but it would be anywhere from 3.5 to 8, depending on the people who could be there, volunteers, the timing of everything. And so it was a beast of a process. And so we do that for 2019. And then of course, 2020 hits and you're like, man, what do? You shut down church and you lock it down. And Texas was a wild place to be. Texas, they don't, Texas has their own kind of.
It's a different country, man. It's great.
It's a different country. I enjoyed being in Texas during those years. However, but we shut down church. And so then now it's going from, this beast of broadcast to, oh my gosh, now we got to record. Everyone was in that season where how do you record? How do you stream online? How do you do all this stuff? And so we actually end up booking a penthouse in one of the hotels in Houston and just begin to do like pre-record. So we record on Thursday. So now I go from being like a, production director, like manager to, pre-records, like almost like a creative kind of role where it's like, hey, we need to pre-record this, we need to edit it, we need to have it perfected by Sunday. And that was kind of our method, was do a pre-record on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, edit, and then stream on Sunday. And so, it was wild. So it's another kind of season of just flexing a different muscle, editing, a lot of editing, a lot of, diving into the specifics of cameras. We would bring contractors in to help us with just knowledge gaps that we had as a team. And it's like, hey, come help us film this or come teach us to do this. And the one thing I'll say about contractors is use them. Like people who are professionals in our industry, don't ever think that you are too big or too smart or too whatever. Be humble in what you do and be humbled enough to say like, oh, I could use some professional help and pay the contractor what they're worth because dude, like the amount of information and help that you can get from a professional is, you can go learn it yourself, but also let's bring somebody in and let's get this thing right. And so that's where like I feel like my beginning to work with contractors was like a really big portion of that, is where we worked with a lot of contractors to make sure that everything was tip top. So did COVID for a couple of months. That style of pre-records. Everyone goes back to church, big boom, big huge hoopla thing, and so it's a lot of when we come back, that's where like the ideas just start sparking. So I'm like, man, I start working with one of our lighting directors. I'm like, let's cook up some awesome stage designs. Let's do this. I'm a very like creative person when it comes to a lot of production. I'm like, I get very tired of the same thing over and over. And I'm always the person that's also like wanting to push forward new ideas and like, hey, let's try this, let's try that. So we did. We kind of had this sandbox of a room. So you look at a load in and load out, and you're like, oh my gosh, man, it's so tiring. But it's also like, yes, you can recognize and be real about the fact that it is tiring. Yeah. But also look at some of the benefits of like, hey, you set this thing up. Your volunteers have a much higher knowledge, but then also you have a creative sandbox where you can kind of come in.
It's like a blank slate.
Totally. Every week.
Every single week. And so it kind of became this really cool, like we would just cook up these different ideas, plan them, execute them. Maybe we would fail or something. We was like, all right, let's shift this around and do this and do that. So we kind of were able to do a bunch of different like cool design stuff in that season, which was really great. And then 2020 hits, and 2020 was crazy because the pastor and leadership, we go through this, the big thing of pastor going through marriage. What would compromise? Is that the compromisation?
Sure, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so then now I'm walking through that to a degree where it's like, okay, how do you navigate something that as big as that rocks the staff, that rocks everything that you've been doing, that you've been working in. And it's not something I even often talk about, what I mean? It's still pretty fresh, only a couple of years ago, but I think it's my biggest takeaway from that is looking at what you do and doing it for God and not for man. Cause I think that for me, that was the biggest way that I could kind of separate, like, man, nobody is perfect. No human being is perfect. Yeah. And so having that mentality of like, no, people will let you down, people will hurt you, and that's going to happen. Not that it's okay, but that your faith is not in people and not in man. It has to be in God. Yes. And so for me, I was like, you know what? At the end of the day, like, I'm going to trust God with the situation. He's going to do his thing. And the church is back on its feet with staff and doing its thing, right? And but in that transition season, we had to be very real with ourselves and ask ourselves, like, hey, God, like, is this where we need to be? Is this the place where we want to continue to serve, continue to sow into? And so we definitely didn't transition immediately. We were there for a couple months before ultimately deciding, like, had a couple decisions and conversations, and ended up moving back to Elevation, moving back home to Charlotte. So we were in Houston for a couple of years, and ultimately we're like, hey, I called up our production manager, and who I've got great relationships with, and all that, and just felt very clearly after much prayer. And I think a lot of people think about decisions like that, and they're like, oh, just make a decision. Oh, you just left. No, it's like, pray and ask God and be very specific in your prayer and ask him to open doors and make things clear. That's every transition I've always asked God, hey, God, make it very clear where I need to be, where I need to go. And so we ended up moving in April of 22, we moved back to Charlotte, and we've been back there for 2 years now. And September of last year, a couple staff transition happened. And so then I moved full-time over to our broadcast campus. And so now
you're here.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at. That's
crazy, man.
You've had a lot of different seasons going through that story.
Yeah.
The thing I love about it though is like you can tell when you're describing it that you haven't just kind of experienced those things, but you've like reflected on those things and thought about, okay, what am I learning from this? What am I taking away from this? How is it making me a better leader, making me a better production person, making me a better, person in my community?
Yeah.
And I think that's like, when you think about coaching for people that find themselves in similar situations, maybe it's something that's hard.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something that was just a short season and they're moving on to something else.
Yeah.
But like not taking it for granted in the sense like, oh, that's just a thing in the past.
Right.
But what is it something that I'm learning from and I'm
100%.
actually like reflecting on and taking away from?
Yeah. Well, it's like the leader who said to you, no, you're not going to be a lead intern. Go get some other experience.
Right.
Like, number one, I think it's awesome that they said that, because I think there's so many churches that have the interns and they just move up right in their role and they know nothing other than their own space.
They could have just kept you as like as labor, but they're like, no, you need something else.
Yeah, I think it's very wise.
100%. I think about that even now is like, I've had 2 interns, both of which I am telling, hey, I need you to go get life experience. But on top of that, I'm trying to show them where to go get that from.
Yes.
Because I think for me, that was something that was told to me. And so I'm like, but I wasn't given necessarily the exact steps of where do I get that? What do I do? And so with a lot of the young guys now that I'm around, and with a lot of them see what I do or see what we do as a church, and they're like, hey, I want to work here. I'm like, great. That's great.
Yeah.
But this is not an entry level position.
Yeah.
Just to be, and I try to be very blunt and straightforward with people. One of my interns, I told him, I said, hey, look, like, you do not have the experience that I'm looking for in this role, just to be candid. However, here's some of the things, here's some options, here's some companies you can work for, here's some people you can reach out to, here's some places you can go to actually go get the experience. And that's what he's doing. He's literally working full time right now. I encourage him, hey, stay plugged into the church, because I think when you go gigging, you can get very caught up in weekend stuff, and a lot of times you can make your own schedule, sometimes you can't, but you can get caught up real quick. And so I highly encourage, hey, give, serve, attend, and be in a group. Those
great.
4 things, because it's like it's so key to like get back into and stay plugged into the thing that is giving you life, and is life-giving. Obviously, I want you to have a personal relationship with Jesus on your own, but I also want you to learn and grow and get different experiences. And so that's where I'm at now, is like, I look back at all my experience and I'm like, man, how do I help the next generation of production technicians, production leaders, creatives, all of those guys who were probably where I was at one point, thinking like, where do I get this experience? Where do I go? How do I find this thing? And so that's where like a lot of the role that I'm in, the position that I play, the perspective I have is, man, I want to share on social media. I want to share some of the insight of some of the realness and rawness of what we do. There's cool gear stuff. There's different things we do, but also like I want to also connect with the next generation and be like, hey, let's continue to get better. And wherever you're at, right where you're at, you can continue to grow. You can continue to learn. There's plenty of resources out there. YouTube University, a bunch of different, whether you build relationships with integrators or MXU or different production platforms. Plenty of opportunity, right? So that's kind of where I'm at now, is looking, and outside of my job is like, man, who's the next generation of leader that I can invest in, that I can pour in. And social media has been a really cool and easy way to be who I am, but also hopefully inspire other people to want to learn and grow and get better. So
that the next generation, right? Like, we all have our circle of people that we all know each other, and honestly, very, very similar, mutual friends between all of us. But there's a lot of 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds. I'm like, I don't know who you, like, I've never heard of you. And it's not because they're not doing something cool. It's just because different generation now of leaders coming up in the church. And in the same way that somebody called out in you, don't be late,
right,
and called you higher and go, I see something bigger in you. Like, we have this responsibility to do the same thing. And I think anybody for sure at this table and anybody listening, there has been that person in their life that said, hey man, like I want you to do this differently. And I think you're better than this.
Right.
And those moments are defining and like literally life changing. And just that little, 5-minute conversation can completely change the trajectory of somebody's life or career. And especially going into ministry, I just go, man, like we have to do that because eventually we're going to be the ones that are the XPs, that are the senior pastors, and who's going to be, below us, and who's the rest of that staff. And you just go, man, you have to call those people.
Well, even right now, like a lot of the people listening to this podcast, they're leading volunteer teams of young people. They maybe lead a young staff, whatever. Like you're very connected through your work in social, through the teams that you interns, things like that you're doing at Elevation. Like how would you, like, what is it that those leaders need? Like if you were talking to someone that's thinking about, hey, I have some young people that I have influence over.
Right.
Like what are some things that you would point out to them? Like, hey, think about it like this. These are the kinds of things, the way to invest in them that's really going to get them further down the field in where they're at in their life. Because it's easy for an older leader to not really have a good context. Like where is the younger generation? Like what are they going through? Like what's their frame of reference to this church and production thing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And I think it's a great topic to discuss. I think a lot of it starts with relationship, period. I think a lot of times we say we're good at relationships, but we don't do the things that actually build relationships, conversations, understanding where are these 18 to 20-year-olds at? Like, how are they thinking? Who are they influenced by? And I'm not saying that as a leader, you need to know and do everything. But I think the relational piece is the absolute key, especially for anybody in the church, even like really your entire volunteer team, but specifically these younger guys coming up. I mean, they want to learn. They want opportunity. They want to get experience. But I think it also, you talked a little bit about someone calling stuff out and being that person. If you haven't done that, and if you see things that they're so receptive, they should be so receptive and willing for someone to speak life into them. And as a leader, you have to be willing to be that person. To have a candid conversation of, hey, look, stop showing up late. Or if you're not going to be direct, be direct. Stop showing up late. Or hey, what are some of the things that are causing you to be late?
Totally.
And hey, let me pick you up. Some of those things where it's like, if someone is passionate about serving and wanting to be here and wanting to serve, then it's having candid, straightforward conversations. Don't
beat around the bush,
but also drag them around of like, oh yeah, that's just our old intern Ben. Like he's just, whatever. It's like, no, don't have a real conversation with him and point him in the direction of.
Because that's not doing any favors by like other people just being like, oh, that's just, this kid is right. You're forming that sort of expectation of a person versus saying like, no, we're going to change that course immediately. And then people seeing them as someone that is contributing and has potential and, is invested in. Because you're stewarding other people's perceptions of the people you're leading in a lot of ways as a leader.
Absolutely.
And I think so many leaders don't do that or hesitate to have those direct conversations because like we've talked about this in other episodes, like we don't want to be mean. We don't want to be mean to our staff. We don't want people to not like us. We don't want to like.
That's really what it is. It's like we just don't want people to not like us.
That's 100% what it is. It's like, oh, I don't want to be mean because I want this guy. I want my interns to like me. I want my staff to like appreciate me. And it's very selfish for me to do that because the selfless thing is to be able to call that out into somebody and just go, hey man, how can I help you make this a better thing, a better experience?
And I think there's a level, if you care about somebody, you're going to have those conversations. So I would ask yourself like, man, what level do I actually care about people? And if I don't, or if I want to care about people deeper, it has to start also from your relationship with God. And I think that is like, man, how do I care for these people better? Well, okay, we need to care for yourself and care about the things that you're internalizing and things that you're putting in and how you're developing. Because I think sometimes as leaders, we look at outwardly of like, man, I've got so many things to manage. I got so many things to do. We've got this, I got to communicate that. I got to fix this, do this. But also I think if you're able to slow down and actually get in a group of guys, have conversations where it's like, be real with people. Like, hey, here's where I'm at. How do I get better? I have a group that I meet with every Thursday, at least whenever my schedule allows. I try to meet with them every Thursday. And every single time I leave that group of dads, it is like, I feel so charged up. And so like, okay, I've got practicals of the way of things that I can do. I'm not the only one that's struggling with X, Y, and Z. And it is so helpful. So I'm like, as a leader, if you're going to lead other people and you're going to care and have relationships with other people, be candid, be direct, but also figure out, man, how am I investing in myself in order to operate out of overflow. We talk about overflow all the time, but it's like, what does that actually look like? What does that actually, where does my care, where's my relationship stem from?
Yeah.
And I think that like a lot of that is directly off of that. So
yeah, I think people, you hear people talking about the overflow of your spiritual life and caring for yourself personally, mentally, spiritually, physically, whatever that is. And because it's talked about so much, it just feels like, of course I know that. But how often does that actually become practical in your life as a leader? And the overflow of that is very real to your staff and to your team. And they feel it when you're not healthy. They go, oh my gosh, like I want you to get healthy. And they're nervous to call it out on you. And I think it goes both ways. I think there's, it's an open conversation and the ability to speak life into people, man. Like those words mean a lot.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
The relational thing just makes me think back to the Waffle House story.
Oh yeah.
Like if you're a leader and you've got, interns or volunteers or whatever, and you don't like, how do I even start to connect with people? Waffle House would be a great start.
Yeah.
Like no agenda.
Literally.
Just whatever.
Yeah, let's just go chill. Let's go hang. I remember one of my production directors back in the day, he would just invite us over to play video games.
Yeah.
And I know that's not quite the vibe because everything's online, but play video games or do something do something outside of church. You have to do somethething outside of church.
Halo LAN party. Let's go.
Dude, I'm telling you, we used to do, they used to do StarCraft was like a huge, all the times they do StarCraft, Guitar Hero, all that jazz. So, but speaking even on the culture, building culture of your team, one of the things that if you're on my social media at all, you've seen Go Podium. And the kind of like the stem of that was to create culture because it's something that we've done for years, Go Podium. It's literally just a communicative thing we do in production to send the podium out during the top of the song. And I was like, man, that's such a cool like stamp in the experience where it's at the height of worship. Everyone's engaging. It's big energy. And we make the transition intentionally. So that way, while people are engaging, boom, podium's there. Pastor can walk out, do his thing. And so I just saw that and I was like, man, that could be really cool. Let me just clip it and just let's clip it and post it and just, but it stemmed from a place of like, man, I kind of want to create culture. And the whole point of it is like the thing that we do every single week that may seem mundane. It may seem like just carrying a podium out. So whether you're running lyrics or you're running a camera, you're gripping or whatever, you're gaffing cables, like everything you do matters and everything you do builds up to the gospel getting preached. And so that's like the key thing is like, what are some of the things on your team that you can use to create culture? Whether it's a Go Podium, and not everyone had, people argue all the time whether it's a podium or a lectern in the comments. But
that's really funny.
Lectern, that's amazing.
Lectern is in like a college lecture hall, I feel like.
Well, they get very specific. Like a lectern is, they call this a lectern because a podium technically has a thing you can step up onto. Allegedly.
Oh, okay. All right.
But it's really,
doesn't his thing have a step on the bottom?
It does have a step. He doesn't step up on it necessarily, but he could.
He totally could.
Absolutely could. It's got an option.
It looks heavy.
It is. It's 2-person. It's definitely a 2-person.
Yeah, I mean, I see him carrying. I'm like, oh, there's some weight to that.
Is there some volunteer training that has to happen? Like, you're approved to step into the podium role.
I was gonna do well. We do have to coach people on it, truthfully, because you have to carry it a certain way so you don't hit your shins. It's like a razor scooter to the shins. Yeah. No, there's no. I mean, I was gonna do like a little parody video of training for the podium or something like that, just for fun, just
pumping iron.
Yeah, literally just like doing some like chest press or whatever. But no, it is heavy though. There's definitely a system.
But what I love about that is again, it's not just letting situations happen to you.
Right.
You're intentionally looking at them and looking for opportunities and looking for ways to kind of, like you said, build culture, recognize people, like demonstrate the purpose in what we do. Like even just the way that you talked about that moment in the service, it takes something that's very logistical and attaches it to a purpose. Right. So for leaders that are listening, and again, it's the same thing, whether they're moving a podium or whatever their normal Sunday rhythm is. How are you looking at ways to make that meaningful, to invite people in to celebrate what's happening, and not, again, just letting it kind of be something that's taken for granted?
Yeah, absolutely. It's dude, it's culture is so important, man. It's so important on every single team. I think for me, like I always try to lead from a place. One, being authentic is, I just truly feel like I know I have a lot of energy. And it's a thing, even in like the way I edit or the videos I make, I'm like, I know that I have energy. I know I can be annoying if you're like, oh, this guy's whoa. But I know that about myself. And so what I try to do is I use that to build like to build people around me. Because one of the things I often think about is like, okay, if God has gifted me with this wiring, whether you call it ADHD, it's really funny. Growing up, my mom would never diagnose it. She'd be like, no, he doesn't have ADHD. And she just wouldn't want to put that label on me necessarily.
Yep.
But I know I've got energy. I know whatever. But I know also too that the energy that I have is oftentimes could be something that somebody else needs.
Yeah.
Like
100%.
I'm not trying to come in over the top and overwhelm you, but like being able to have a conversation or be able to say, hey, how are you doing? Or, you know, being able like, oh, I know when Shep's here, like, man, the energy, the level of everything is going to feel like, you know, and I also think that energy is also tied to hard work. Like I've grown up, learned, like, you know, I played on a football team growing up. And so you train together, you work hard together, you know, you kind of live and die in the trenches together, if you will. And I kind of take some of those same principles of like, man, if we're going to lead a team, we got to work together. We got to be together. We got to have energy, and have a good time. Because I think that that's like, you can get really like, hard work is hard, period. But if you're not able to bring energy to that thing or make it fun, then it just stays as hard work. And it's much easier to kind of like, get down in the dumps and be, you know.
When it's, you know, the load in, load out of a mobile campus is a perfect example of that. It's not easy. Everybody would love to have a building instead.
Right.
But like you think of the camaraderie that you have, not only at 4 a.m. Waffle House, but just at 5 a.m. unloading the trailer.
Yeah.
Those people and the relationships that you built and the memories that you have together, like it's like going to college and like living in my roommates in college. I'm still, you know, 11 years later, such great friends with, because of all the, you know, 7 guys living in a 2-bedroom apartment is, you know, way too many people in one space. But the camaraderie that is built around that is huge. Right. And that builds so much culture to have that. So it's like, don't think just if you have a mobile campus that you can't.
But if you steward it, because you know there are mobile campuses where everyone's like down and frustrated and bitter. And it's like the same environment can yield such different fruit depending on how you steward that and how you lead your team through it. And so 100%. Again, like you talk about hard work, as a leader, that's part of your hard work. It's not just like showing up and doing what you do on a Sunday. Yeah. It's like the mental work of keeping the main thing. How are you going to lead your people? How are you going to continue try to make their experience better, add those moments of joy? Right. Because, you know, whether it's a mobile campus or something challenging at, you know, in some other area of ministry, I think, or life as a whole, literally any challenging circumstance you run into in life, in or out of ministry, like the same circumstance can yield like completely polar outcomes and fruit and results depending on how you choose to engage it and how you choose to lead yourself, how you choose to like surround yourself with other people to invest in and invest in you. And so like just keeping that perspective of not letting the circumstance dictate what is going to happen, but saying, hey, this is the kind of outcome that I think I want to see and I think God wants to see come out of this. And how am I going to work in that direction?
Right. Absolutely.
And I think, you know, you talking about like energy, right? So many production guys are introverted. That's hard for them. But like you're setting the speed and the energy of the rest of your team.
Yeah, the tone.
Whether or not you are excited to be there or not, you have to show up with that energy because people they're gonna follow whatever the leader is doing and however they're acting. And it's very, very easy. Even for volunteers who like they're not going to be the one to come up to you to go, how are you doing, man? You have to be that one to do that to them.
Here's the thing, they might, if they see you do it as a leader, that's the cool thing about it. They, in a year, they might be the one doing that and leading out in that way and having that kind of
no different than you showing up at 5 instead of 5:30.
100%.
And showing up and people are like, oh, maybe I should show up too. People follow that, whether or not you think that you're a leader or that you're going to set the tone of that. Like they just do. They set the energy.
And it's not like, you know, it's not about, I think people hear that and it's, you can kind of interpret it as, oh, you want me to be fake. It's like, you want me to just pretend like everything's great when it's not, or I'm not. It's like, no, you can totally show up and say, hey man, this is hard. Like naming the reality. Yeah. But one of the things we do here is like, we do hard things sometimes. Like we like push through, or we know when to ask for help. That's a big one. Like we talk about humility all the time in this podcast. I feel like, hey, even as a leader or whether you're a team member, to show up and say, hey, I'm having a hard time. Yeah. I want to be real about that. I know you guys all have my back, so could someone help me? Like, can I have some help today, or someone like kind of come in beside me or whatever? Yeah. And I think that just again models the kind of authenticity that you really want to see.
Right. Even like you just said, naming the thing that it is. Yeah. This is hard work. What if that becomes one of your values? We work hard. Yeah. then the expectation is if I join this team, I will work hard.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because it is just saying what it is. Like, hey, we work hard. Like, think about the disciples, Jesus' disciples. Those boys weren't chilling.
Nope.
You know what I mean? Like, they worked hard to get the gospel out into the world and to support Jesus and all the things he was doing. And so I'm like, what's there? To me, there's nothing wrong with hard work. Earlier, you talked a little bit about along the same line of relationships. The way for leaders, the way to build relationships are those side-by-side experiences. And those side-by-side, like if you're in a load in, load out culture and production, like that's what you have to do, that is exactly how you build relationships with people who are young and people who are, just up and coming middle schoolers, high schoolers, young adults. You have to have those side-by-side experiences. And if you're not doing that, like say, for example, you don't load in, load out, you're at a church, you need to create something, whether that's a cookout, whether that's let's all go play pickleball, let's all go laser tag or go to the local football game,
whatever it is.
Something, you got to create experiences where you guys can talk about it. And you have more than just, hey man, good to see you today on Sunday. How was your week? Because that in and of itself, like people, like any person is going to crave authenticity and crave a real genuine connection and relationship. And so, pull out your calendar and schedule lunches with all of your volunteers for the next month and go take them to lunch, get to know their story, figure all that stuff out. Because there's so many times where I have conversations with volunteers. And for example, this guy the other day, we went and had a great conversation about AI. And I was like, my mind was like blown. I was like, oh my gosh, you could do this with AI? Like, and he's like deep into it. And I'm like, man, this could be such a crazy cool tool. That rhymed. For our church. And it was really funny. I was showing one of our audio engineers who does like the creative side of audio. And he was like, they had written out like this whole storyboard for Christmas. And it was like these scenes and props and all this stuff. And he's like, dude, I need to basically take all this and put it into a stack for a videographer and a producer to read. And I was like, oh, just use ChatGPT. And he's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, bro, look, check this out. Take a picture of it, throw it in ChatGPT, boom, in 10 seconds, I have what I need. And he goes, no way. and he's like sitting there for a second. And I'm like, yeah, is this what you need? Because I had no idea what he was. I typed the prompt in, and I'm like, is that what you're looking for? He's like, that just saved me 6 hours of work.
That's amazing.
And I was like, dude, well, great. And that, I just helped my team get better. And then I had our music director was texting me this week. He's like, dude, this thing is changing my life. Like all this stuff. I'm like, great.
That's so good.
But that stemmed from a conversation I had with a volunteer who's like in AI and doing a lot of that stuff. So who knows the kind of the things that you'll gain. And I think you touched a little bit about humility. Like if I'm willing to be humble myself to have these conversations and learn from people. It's not something I talked about in this past hour, but that's something, a trait of mine where I'm like, I get where I'm at. I'm a broadcast engineer at Elevation Church. I have not made it. Like I'm not like, yeah, man, sick dude, I'm done. Like I'm retired. No, like there is so many things I don't know, so many relationships I don't have, and so much stuff that I need to learn. And so that humility piece is so key as a leader to operate in confidence. Like you've been called to lead how you're supposed to lead, but you also need to lead in humility and get to know people and figure out and get their stories. Cause I'm like, who knows? Maybe the conversation you have is an AI conversation or some type of editing conversation or something where you can really move your church forward or move your team forward based off of conversation.
Gosh, it's listening and learning from the people that are around you, man. Like there's so much to work on with that. And I think I think of all these volunteers that I had over the years that you kind of pass by conversations that if you dove deeper into those, even though you're busy or whatever, like so much life and learning comes out of those things. And I just, man,
why do we do that? Why do we go so fast? Like, why do we like, what is in our, back to my small group dad study, we talk a lot about slowing down. You know, as dads in leadership and ministry, all of us can relate. I've got a wife and 2 kids and dude, like the intentionality that I have to have of putting my phone away and giving my 3-year-old, even though he may or may not remember whatever, but like he still wants, Daddy, can we go fight?
Yes.
Like, yeah, dude, let's go. And if I'm just over here on my phone the whole time, it's like there's such an importance to slowing down and disconnecting. And so like I think it's a bigger problem than we realize sometimes
100%.
of like, you know, just scrolling on social media. It's so funny being on social media, but then, you know, being on social media, but then also telling people, hey, you need to get off social media.
I know.
You know what I mean? It's such a weird kind of like dichotomy because it really is a tool and it should be a tool, but it becomes an idol. It becomes an addiction. And like, dude, the ability to slow down and listen to people and have conversations, we would definitely be in a much stronger place.
And even as a leader, like creating margin, you think about, you know, even what time did you pick for your call time, right? Did you pick a call time where you're going to actually have a little bit of flex and downtime and whatever, so that, you know, you wrap 30 minutes early and now you like grab coffee, chill, catch up. And it's not, you're not just wasting time, but you're doing it to create space so that you have time for more than just like, what's next? What do I have to set up? Do we check everything? Great, go. Done.
Absolutely.
You know?
One of our campuses used to do exactly that. They would, we would load everything in, do our like cue sheet meeting before run through, and then go across the street to Starbucks. Because we had one across the street, and it was at our uptown campus. So it was like right on Main Street, all this stuff. It was really great. And I always would see that and be like, I used to think like, man, y'all are wasting time. Like, what do y'all do? Like, we need to be ready. But no, like that is a key part of the culture of the team. It's like, hey, guys, let's go grab Starbucks. And it's like, it could be a thing that your team looks forward to.
It 100% is.
And, you know,
this random story when I was at a church in Kansas. So there were 2 services. So the church was kind of downtown area and was just a couple blocks, like right around the corner from a hospital that had a cafeteria. Okay. So the band between services would like walk down the street and go get breakfast at the hospital cafeteria together between services every Sunday. And it was like a thing. It was like their ritual, their community thing, and everyone looked forward to it. It was random because it's like a hospital and it's like memorable, you know? And so it's just like these little things.
You got to have it. And I know like different churches do different things with volunteers of like feeding them or breakfasts and lunches. But I'm like, dude, if you could cut all that and do what you need to do and then set something up so volunteers can go grab food together and just go be together outside of church, I think that is like the key to having a healthy team. And even as a leader, just leading strong. So
and I think people, you know, serving for them, feel like that. A lot of people use that as their checkbox of community, and I go, that's not like, that's a piece to community. That's your first step into community.
Right.
But it doesn't happen when we're just running slides or when we're mixing or we're running a camera.
It's like if you're involved in, like say you're in bowling club and you go and you bowl and then you leave and you never talk to engage with all the people that are there doing it with you. It's the same thing. If you show up and you serve and you run camera and you leave, like that's great. But that thing is just sort of a vehicle that hopefully brings something greater and more meaningful along with it.
Right.
And like if the people in our church are getting more time to connect with people in their bowling club or their pickleball club than they are in like serving in our production team. Like
I'd rather go to the pickleball club.
We should probably work on that. You know?
Yes.
I'm going to pickleball instead of church.
Absolutely. It sounds great. I think everybody needs to read The Ruthless Elimination Hurry by John Mark Comer.
Yeah.
I read it like every, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. I like find myself like, I'm going really fast on the interstate all the time. And it forces
you
myself.
have a Tesla, that's why.
0 to 100 in 2 seconds.
It is a little faster to get there. But
battery, you get 13%.
But it's hard to sit in the right lane going 70 miles an hour when everybody's flying by at 85. It's hard to pick, like, you know, one of the things he talks about in that book is like when you're going to a stoplight, and you know, I think we all do this, and we go, hey, what's my guess of the fastest way I'm going to get past this light? Okay, this one has 2 cars, this one has 4. I'm going to go in the 2-car lane. You go to the grocery store, you're like shopping real quick and you know, looking for the shortest lane to do it in. And he's like, pick the long lane. Sit there. And just be like willing to like sit in the silence and watch everybody fly around you know, next to you. And that is really, really hard. It's very, very eye-opening every time I've read that.
Dude, and on that same vein of like churches looking at elevation, I know that a lot of times people look at elevation like, oh my God, we gotta be like that. We gotta have a spider cam. We gotta, what are they doing? You know, and it's not just elevation, it's other churches and stuff. But I think that same kind of like mentality of slowing down is like, okay, chill. First off, you're not that. You are you. Do what you're called to do, be what you're called to be. But also like, man, what if you slow down and evaluate it? Okay, what do I have? what is in my hands right now?
Yeah,
How can I maximize the gear, the people, the resources, the services, the time? I think if we slow down and evaluate some of that stuff, again, be inspired, get inspiration, find your people to be creative from, do that. That's helpful. But don't let that become the idle thing that you're like chasing after. Because then now you're talking about slowing down. It's like now you're just running every single Sunday to like, got to do this, got to do that. Like, there's some practical things that we can do to help the broadcast, help the stream, help the sound, do this, do that, bring in some professionals, just saying. But also like, don't just sprint after what you see and think that is the thing that we got to do. It's like, no, Elevation was set up in 2006 and has gone through many different phases.
And there was no spider cam in 2006.
No spider cam in 2006. It was like, I wish sometimes you could take the mentality of the way something was built. Cause you see Apple, you see Amazon and the garages that these guys started. And then now you see the $1 billion corporation that they are. And you're like, man, dude, I want to go work. But do you want to go do the thing that they did to go where they are? You know what I mean? I always like think about that too. And, but at the same time, it's like, man, what are some of the things that are in your hands? Slow down, evaluate, man, that is cool. You can acknowledge it all day long, do that. But also don't get too caught up.
Totally. If you're not using the cameras that you already have to the best of your ability, like you're not, like a spider cam is not helpful to you, right? You know? So like the journey to get there, it's like we were talking about with young leaders and like create like the life experience. It's like the same thing. Like the life experience of maximizing and mastering what you have to move on to the next thing, to move on to the next thing. Like churches will ask sometimes, this is getting in the weeds, they'll be like, oh, we really need a broadcast console to fix our mix sounds terrible online. We need a broadcast console. I'm like, bro, your mix sounds terrible in the room. So like you need to fix first. Tune your drums, man.
Also
like,
your band is terrible.
Fix that first. And when you've mastered that, then move on to the next thing. You know,
100%. It's so important. How much time we got?
We're plenty.
Okay,
cool.
There's
on that same vein of like tech and all that. I was at a church recently, and I was just evaluating the system. We spent $0 on gear, but we added an online hosting. We added the ability for them to host online with a camera in the lobby, and we added a couple extra sermon shots and looks in the room for the sermon for $0. And so that to me is like, I love that stuff because I'm like, dude, let's maximize. And let me help with some of that stuff or reach out to professionals like, hey, here's what I have. How can I maximize it? And that's even like whenever I watch church streams, which I've been doing a lot recently. And whenever I watch them, I'm always thinking to myself, I'm like, oh, dude, you could try this or you could try that or you could do this. But I also wonder, like, has anyone ever told them that? Or has anyone ever shared like, just try this, just try that. And it don't spend any money. But there's some practical small things like that you can do to increase your stream or make things feel better in the room. It was really funny, just also on the same tech vein. The guy was asking me, he was like, hey, I really want iMac in the room. And I was evaluating the stream online. And I was like, I don't think you want this quality online in the that you're putting online in the room. It might end up being more of a distraction than it would actually be helpful. Now, maybe a tight camera one shot on the pastor just so that you can see him or something. But, you know, hey, maybe what you have is a blessing. Maybe what you have is actually how you should be doing it. You've been seeing explosive growth. Maybe the next step is not iMac in the room or a broadcast console. Maybe it's just diving into the thing you have, like figuring out, hey, if my mix isn't great, have you told that person or has that engineer been told like, hey, that mix doesn't sound great, or here's some tools you can do to get your mix to sound better? Because I also know the very real reality that sometimes it's guys just coming in after a long week of work to push some faders, and that's okay. But also, hey, what if I paid a professional to give them a start file where it's like, hey, every week start right here. Here's your template. Tweak it if you want to, but you have something to go back to. You know, there's so many of those practicals where I'm like, hey, you could do a lot with the exact system that you have. Now you can upgrade your system. You can talk with Amplio, get these guys out to evaluate. But it's also, you know, I think that's also the same vein of slowing down is like, stop just looking at what I don't have and try to bring a professional in or bring somebody in to evaluate what you do have. Or if you can do it yourself, do some research and do that yourself.
That's good, man.
And I'm assuming, and I know this for the fact because I do this too, is you look at Elevation. I've watched Elevation for years, years and years and years. You know, and have always been jealous, right, of every church environment that I ever worked in, and watching a stream, watching Pastor Furtick do something. I'm like, gosh, I wish that I could do that, right? And it's very easy, especially now with social media, and everybody knows this, but to just envy what they have and then sulk and be depressed about all the things you don't have.
Yeah, right.
And so for you to say that and to go, hey man, it's not just about the gear. It's not just about the cool things that we're doing or the sexy things you see online or online stream, whatever it is. You can do a lot with a little bit, and it's no different than the biblical version of God going, use what you have to the best you possibly can.
100%. Maybe it sounds maybe it sounds a little hypocritical, me saying use what you have when I'm over here with a
yeah.
I mean,
but that's how you get to, like, if you ever are gonna, if anyone ever does arrive at sort of like an elevation-esque
but
tier,
is that also, I would ask, is that an arrival?
Yeah.
Well, say you find yourself in that scenario.
Okay.
Not even if you say, hey, you're coming at it from a place of humility, you're like, I would like to work in an environment like that one day.
Yeah.
You didn't get there in one jump.
Right.
Like, it's the process. It's you demonstrated faithfulness and skill with what you had. Yeah. And then you did it again and again and again. Like, you told us your whole story of set up, tear down, 4 a.m. calls. Like, it's an example of exactly that.
Yeah.
Where
be faithful with what you have.
Exactly. Right.
It's huge. No, it's so important. I think, because it's a conversation I have a lot of times where people ask me, what gear do you have all the time? I'm like,
it doesn't matter,
dude.
You know, if you want to know how much it costs, just reach out to the company we bought it from and they'll quote you. Yes. You know, but it's also, you know, there's very practical steps. Like, you know, when you talk about the spider cam, it's like, whoa, that thing is crazy. Most everyone, most everyone who has seen the post is like, why does this church have this? This is crazy for a church.
Comments are quite
comments
amazing.
they're my favorite. It's such a wonderful time. But it's also like, okay, why do you have something like that? Well, let's take a look at the reason why. Okay, let's look at our online ministry and let's look at what has happened through COVID with how much the online side of things has grown and the ask and also just the ways that we push. Like, we're like, okay, man, how can we create a fresh and new experience every week for people who are maybe tuning into the church for the first time? That's the heart behind all of it. It always, in whatever church you're at, it always has to align with the vision and the mission of your lead pastor. Yeah. So if your vision and mission of lead pastor is not, you know, if what you're doing is not in alignment with that, fix that. But with us, it's always, hey, we want to reach people who are far from God and see people raised to life in Christ. And so, you know, if that's going to be the focal point and the driver, does it mean you have to have a spider cam? Absolutely not. Yeah. Does it mean you need to have any cameras? Absolutely not. Yeah. But it just so happens that when we started, you know, the production was a key piece to like, hey, we want people to have a good experience here in church. How do we do that? Yeah. Okay, well, we can do this, or we can do that, or we can do this. Okay, great. Well, now we have this online portion. How do we maximize that? Yeah. How do we get the gospel out to people in the best, most efficient, effective, sounds the best, looks the best way? And I don't like using the excuse of like, well, if the world has this, why can't church? Sure, it's like, okay, but it's like really more so like, hey, how do we get the gospel of Jesus out in the best way? Yeah. And does it require all these, you know, gadgets and tools and things? No, it doesn't. But they do help. And if the reason is to get new people who don't know Jesus, but they see some cool tech or see some great transitions or some great sounding audio, or they hear the message that helps them engage. The other thing that I often think about being on social media, here's a free social media and church sermon hack, is like, what are people's attention span on social media or on YouTube? No, seriously.
It's nothing, man.
Like, you expect someone who doesn't watch church or look at church or know anything about church to sit through a 40, 50, 60-minute sermon of one shot of one guy speaking from the Bible. Some people will do that for sure. But also, like, let's be real. Like, we're going to swipe off that real quick. You know what I mean? And so I think even thinking about, okay, what are some of the ways you actually grab people's attention nowadays? That is even a way that I think about like what we do. So we've started doing some like Instagram streams and YouTube short streams, doing vertical streams and things like that, and experimenting with them. And for some reason, I don't even understand it sometimes, but Instagram we'll stream on Instagram for our 9:30 and it'll have like 2,000 people watching pastor's account. Well, you know, he's got a couple million, but still like Instagram is not a streaming platform. No. So I'm like, man, that's crazy that that many people are logging on to Instagram. So it's like, okay, this is one, evaluate the technology. How much money did you spend on streaming on Instagram? Well, actually, I think I spent $200 on a little mini recorder. And that was I used what I had. And I'm like, hey, this can be an easy avenue. And now the team's like, man, this is great. Thank you guys so much, whatever. But I also always think about like, man, what is the attention span of your viewers? We want to get the gospel out to people. And there's so many different avenues and ways: podcast, live, sermons on Sundays, e-group studies and teachings and things like that. But I think the driver for us is always, man, we want to reach people who are far from God. And the way I see that sometimes, the way I interpret it, again, that's above my pay grade of sometimes the how and the what. But I always try to evaluate it from that standpoint too. Is like, man, is what we're doing, because I even, whenever I get comments on, man, what do you guys have a spider cam? It's like, that's a great question. I mean, that's a valid question to ask, man. Why do you guys have that? And it all comes down to the vision, the mission of the church. What are we trying to do? How are we accomplishing that? How are we going to use that? In some cases, my case would be like, dude, it is by far the most dynamic camera you can put in a worship space, or in a sermon or a content capture space. If you want to use the word content, the gospel is much bigger than the content, but still, it's so dynamic. It has the ability to go almost anywhere in the room, capture almost any angle, keep everything fresh. And with Pastor rolling out his teaching screen, one of the big drivers was we want to be able to capture that, the way he's teaching in a very dynamic way. So it enables us to do that. Yeah. Obviously, it elevates worship a little bit. Whenever we haven't done a recording with it yet, but I'm sure the guys, the EW team, will love to use it for the recording. And then just transitions and different things. It adds such a crazy. So in my opinion, I'm like, honestly, if you had like a camera 1, maybe a camera 2, and a spider cam, 3 cameras, that might be the same cost of 10. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yes. And so even just on the cost side of things, it's like evaluate your space, but also don't just get a spider cam because you think you have to have a spider cam.
Or just because elevation has it. Yes.
Absolutely.
And then you have to run it. It's not that simple to operate.
So installation week was, somebody's over there. Installation week was a full week of the Ross team coming in, and I was basically the main integrator for the contact for it. So we're hauling these 200-pound winches up from the floor to the catwalk, and getting things set, getting things ready. It's a very complex system. Oh yeah, very complex. And I have a contact in Atlanta that I can call up if I need help. But truly, like, I am the guy who has to fix it if it goes wrong or train our volunteers. Yep. And so it's another factor. It's like, you can't just get it and think it's just, man, this is great. No, there's
AI doesn't run it yet. Yeah, but maybe one day.
You can program moves on it, which is actually kind of cool. You can program the whole thing. So yeah, there's another real factor of like, man, how are you staffing the gear that you have as well? Are you understaffed, or do you need more training? That's a consistent thing, especially like I just took over this role last September. So just about a year I've been in this role. And so, I reach out to the guys who are previously in this role all the time, ask them questions. I'm reaching out. Hey, can you guys connect me with the companies? Can you tell me why? Why do we have these pieces of gear? Why do we have certain things? And so, even me just being curious and humble in that sense of like, I'm not just here to run Elevation broadcast. It's like, no, like, I want to know too, like, hey, what's the purpose of this? Man, great. We have really great gear. The guys who came before me did a fantastic job of setting this thing up for success. But I also, now I'm the one who has to take that and steward it and make decisions and all that. And so, so that's even, been a big factor of all that, is the tech side of really staffing and making sure that the technical things. And on that same vein, like we bring companies in to train us. Like we just did an Everts thing the other week. We're looking at the Ross training for different pieces and parts. But it's like, hey, I want my team to be staffed. We're working with Digico for a couple of things. It's like, I want my guys to know the ins and outs of this thing. So as a leader in tech, I also have to ask myself the question, like, how am I making sure to invest in my team?
That's good.
Where am I sending them? What relationships am I encouraging them to build? Because we talk about volunteers, it's like, yes, volunteers is one thing, but also then you look at the staff and it's like, man, okay, if I'm a creative pastor, if I'm a worship pastor and I'm overseeing production, or if I'm a production manager overseeing it, it's like, okay, what are, outside of the work that we have to do, what are the ways that I'm investing in these guys relationally, spiritually, all those things. So there's whole another layer to that whole thing too. So
huge. Yeah. And I mean, man, manufacturers, other companies, like, they're more than willing to jump in and help.
Yeah.
Very often for free.
Yeah.
Because they care about their product, but like, they won't know to do that unless you ask.
Right.
And there's a lot of people who are willing, like, yeah, of course, man. Like, I want you to use this thing to the best of your ability. And if you don't know how to do it, then let's show you how to do it. So you're not wasting a bunch of money to buy something because somebody else has it.
Right.
And you're just copying that. So
dude, Black Magic is great. Put it on the clip it.
Yep.
Done.
They'll come out and train you for free.
It's going to get a lot of views.
Right?
Right?
Maybe not all manufacturers, but yes. But YouTube University.
It's so funny. I'm very unbiased when it comes to really any gear. Like we're a Ross house.
Yeah.
We've always been Ross. It's kind of bad in some senses because I've grown up with Ross. And so I'm like, when I look at Black Magic, I look at other Grass Valley, Sony, like all these other, the 4A, like all these other different video switchers and consoles, like being in a digital house, in some cases I'm like, oh man, like I was kind of like bougiefied when it comes to a lot of the tech. And so in some areas, I'm like playing catch up to understand like, okay, man, what do you have? Oh, how does that work? Oh, can it do this? Can it do that? Is it the best? And so I do a lot of that research too, just to familiarize myself with some of the things that everyone's working with. And there's a cost factor to gear. There's budgeting is very, very important. Yep. That's the one thing I love about Elevation is we're very, very intentional with our budget. You don't just buy stuff on the whim. The Spider Cam was a 3.5-4 year conversation before.
That's a big deal for somebody to know.
Yes.
Not just like, oh, they got another cool toy.
100%. Our CFO is incredible with the way that he manages money and the way he manages our budget. And that same like mentality is handed down to each budget owner. Is like, you guys are, we're not like hounded, but it's like we also know like this is the thing that we are called to steward and to things. So also you have to look at and evaluate. Okay. The money that's coming in, man, how are we using this to most effectively get the gospel out? The entity of Elevation is crazy. When you look at all of the things, they're about to go on tour this upcoming week for their fall tour. And there's a whole, there's so many entities to it. But I think like even like from the simplest form of whatever your budget is, look at that and let's try to maximize it. Ask questions, man. How am I using the budget that I've been given to get the gospel to people?
Yeah. And you guys might have an extra zero at the end of your budget, but the problems are the same, right? Whether I have $100,000 or $10,000, the problems are the same. You're still trying to get the gospel out.
Yes.
And you can still do it with that.
More money, more problems is what they say.
That is the truth in every single way. Gosh, man.
It's awesome. Well, we've talked a lot about, what you're doing at your church, volunteers, teams, whatever. But the way that I think the majority of people that are listening to this would probably interact with you is going to be online, right?
Absolutely,
Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Tell us about what you're doing online. Where can people check out your content? And then what do they expect to encounter when they do?
Amazing comments.
Amazing. Stay away from the comment section. So majority of my stuff is all on Instagram, is my main platform. I kind of like repost stuff on TikTok, just trying to build a following there. But Instagram's the main thing. And then I'm looking forward to starting a YouTube channel where I do church stream reviews and just post videos of people like submit their stream. And then I'll take 20, 30 minutes of me just chatting. Clearly from this podcast, y'all know I can talk. But that's going to be my next iteration is like, hey, I just want to help people learn and grow and try new things and try new ideas. And like, hey, whatever I say is not the end all be all, but like, maybe there's a suggestion. Maybe there's this or that. But Instagram is the primary thing. A lot of what we do from day to day. A lot of leadership tips. Some production break fixes, tech things. I'll post some camera stuff. I'm primarily on the video side of what we do. So I'll post to my other guy, our guys doing lighting or audio stuff. But you'll just kind of see like the real raw internal side of what we do at Elevation. And, it's nothing crazy special. It really comes down to like discipline and really being aligned with the vision and mission of the church. And so you'll see a lot of that stuff. I do a little bit of consulting on the side too. So if you're like, hey, Shep, I'd love for you to come to my church or come look at this or look at that, I'm always open to get that scheduled out. I also have a full-time job at church. So it's also like, that's my main thing. I think one of the things we didn't touch on, but like, I firmly believe in the church and firmly believe in serving in the church. And so, I think a lot of times the stigma happens where like if you build a following while you're at church, you leave church to go consult and do this thing. It's like, no, like I truly believe like where I'm called right now is I'm called to be in the church and help people who are also like alongside me in the church and not be someone who's necessarily on the outside trying to help you get better at what you do. It's like, no, like let's do this thing together. And so that's really the tone I try to take is like, and there's nothing wrong with consultants or anything like that. But that's the kind of tone I try to take with my social media and what I do is like, hey, I'm in the church too. Let's get better together. Let's work on this thing together and not make it feel like you're just this this random, you're just this guy who's coming in and telling me what to do. No, like, I'm doing this 9 to 5, Monday through Thursday, and a Sunday, every Sunday. So, that's kind of me.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Dude, thank you for coming out and sharing. And
thank you guys.
So many amazing like things. And
anytime we hear people's stories like within church ministry, whether, whatever their sort of specialty track is, there's just listening to the story and the things that they've taken away from, how it's shaped them, it always illuminates like some challenges, some encouragement, stuff that's really helpful. So thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely. And thank you guys so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Shep with 6 underscores.
Shep with 6 underscores.
Shep with 6 underscores.
So maybe I'll get to 5 one day, then to 4, maybe 3, 2, 1. Who knows? But you got to stay humble, right?
That's awesome, man. Very good.
Dude, that's awesome.
Great.
Well, thanks again, man. Until next time.